Welcome to Work Cookie, a weekly gathering of IOs and related professionals for CBOC, the Society for Evidence-Based Organizational Consulting. Ordinarily, we've got an actor as well named Tom, who's our MC and our co-host here every week, and he is sadly absent this week. So we're going to be hosting on our own, and we'll be continuing our deep dive into one of my favorite topics, which is agility. And this is our final week of the agility conversation. So we've covered some topics like the agile mindset, organizational agility, leadership agility. We've had a couple of guests that have come on to speak to their expertise in this area. And our final week is going to be around agility and psychological safety, which interestingly enough, I was listening in last week, this week, excuse me, on a different recording that's on YouTube. And it was specifically talking about organizational agility and psychological safety, and psychological safety as a prerequisite for agile teaming. So last week we did talk about agile team structures and processes. I'm going to go ahead and pop the resources that I'll reference in the chat. I made them a PDF this time for all of you who are here, since ordinarily I exceed the character limit in the box. So I went ahead and just preemptively made that PDF for you guys. So there is that. So I talk about a couple of different topics related to this first, and then we'll open the floor for any additional discussion, questions, comments, and hopefully some great insights from our folks here. So first, one of the resources talks about psychological safety and agility and the relationship to what's called decision intelligence. And so interestingly enough, decision intelligence is an examination of organizational level, agile transformations and how we make decisions in agile transformations, as well as what we call transparent organizational culture to help cultivate psychological safety. Now, that particular book that's in the references there around decision intelligence talks about it more from the organizational agility perspective and the processes that we discussed last week, but it's definitely beyond that. As the first week's really alluded to here in this month, agility is beyond processes for technology teams or for other teams for that matter. It is about a mindset. It is about how organizations and teams perform and respond to change and are adaptive. And several of the other references there really talk about the value and importance of relationships as it relates to psychological safety as well, and the importance of relationships when it comes to trust. And trust being that kind of paving the way for the psychological safety that's required, especially for teams that are going to be adaptive and innovative. So in the Agile framework that we talked about last week, I think Davel, who was our guest last week, talked a little bit about that as well, the importance of the collaboration, which is in reference to really the relationships. And there's actually a really couple of interesting articles out there that talk about social media and psychological safety in organizations. So definitely check those out. It really talks about the social media usage, particularly for virtual employees or for employees who are trying to stay connected with their organization and identify with their organization, and the impact of social media on that. So some really information about interesting information about proactivity within your organization and psychological safety that can be built through your remote and your or your distributed teams. So not necessarily just remote, distributed teams, qualifying some of the literature on that and how that will help with adaptability and helping with identity towards the organization and even potentially your teams. Some other articles that are out there talk about crisis and medical contexts and the need for responsiveness. So a lot of the more recent research out there is talking about COVID, obviously, our most recent, very large, touched everybody crisis and required some adaptability there. And so there's some different frameworks that are mentioned there with regard to leadership in those particular areas. And one final thing that I'll mention on the research or the references that'll be posted with the show is around a holistic approach. So there is an article out there that talks about teachers, but also about the importance of the holistic approach, including things like spirituality and acknowledging that particular element of people who are in your organization, if that's something important to them, making sure that you know and understand that as a leader, and how do you include that in the context. That's a conversation that we do not always have. Some organizations will have resources out there for maybe mindfulness, or you might have a subscription to the Calm app through your organization, but just making sure that people are cared for, looked after, and considered in a holistic way to promote psychological safety, especially if you're going to be in an organization that's doing innovation or looking for some adaptability there. Resilience is one of the topics that we talked about, and that's kind of a common theme throughout some of the resources that are there. And resilient agility is actually a term that's used out there to describe leaders, resilient agility, to make sure that you're continuously responding and resilient in the organization. And so, as we talked about last week, there's a really misnomer, I think, in the agile world that it just means fast. And fast is not a sustainable pace. I've never been a runner, and I never will be. I'll just caveat and say that. But I do know that you can't run forever, right? I do work out in other ways, and mine are limited to 1 hour, and that's when my body starts to give out in a way. So this resilience and resilient agility is meant to be done at a sustainable pace. It's not meant to be fast. And if the misnomer is that agility or agility frameworks or being agile means you're only fast, at some point you're going to burn your people out. That sustainable pace is a really important part of the conversation when you're thinking about how you want to develop and how you want to include agility into the conversation, particularly as a leader. So fast does not mean just furious. I think that's what part of the title was today. It's not fast and furious forever. We do need to consider sustainable paces and create an environment with psychological safety that includes the understanding that we are limited humans and understanding the holistic approaches to us. So we have a hand up, so I'll go over to LindaAnn. Interested to hear what you'll say, and I'll open the floor for any other comments on this topic.
Good morning, and thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, because I had a little challenge with my speakers. So I love this topic, and one of the things about agile kind of equaling fast is when you're working with smaller companies, they are so agile that they can react quickly, and sometimes they need to not react and take action as quickly as they often do, right? Because often fast can equal chaos as well. When you're responding and reacting to whatever situation is being presented, you need to take that minute, maybe that week, and figure it out and look for how does this play out if we react in this manner. And so I think we need to be careful often where agile is excellent, especially the iterative process, and when they can get to the point where they understand that we can move forward without perfection, and that's helpful and gets you more progress, I think, in the long run. You also need to temper that pace with a little bit of projection and thoughtfulness so that you're not creating more chaos and it's actually hindering the progress.
I love that. And I have a question for you, LindaAnn, or for anyone else who may want to respond. What do you think are some ways to identify when to act fast or respond fast, or when to pause and reflect? Are there some moments where an immediate response is required? And if not, is it always pause and reflect? Just some questions for thought there.
In my opinion, there's always a reason to pause, depending on how long you want to pause, but there's always reason to pause. And I've often said this, when I've been in a situation where I could give an answer or react immediately, when I've paused and gone home for taken that drive and that shower and that drive back in the morning and slept on it, and the answer I give the next day is not the same that I would have given in the moment. And it's really important to give that some value because in our workplace today, everybody wants an instant reaction. We are so short tempered in the way that we want answers. And we need to really understand that you don't owe anybody an instant reaction, whether it's your coworker or your children or your spouse or whatever it is. It's important for you to take that minute, come down emotionally, all those kinds of things, and then give a thoughtful response or reaction or whatever that is. I don't think there's any value in giving an immediate response over having a thoughtful response.
I love that. Thank you for that. And I think you're absolutely right. Our culture has really, I guess, trained is the right word, trained us to do things quickly. Technology is a huge part of that, right? You have quicker access to things. You get irritated when your browser's running slow. And so we've been just trained to be in a fast-paced world and culture. And I love that call out though, that there's really always a value in thinking on it and taking a pause and making sure. And I'm sure if Dr. Matt were here, he would love that. That's his favorite part of leadership agility is the pause. So, Nick, let's go over to you.
Yeah, I think, kind of that point, you've got to find a way to identify the signal versus the noise. I think there's a lot of noise that creates that immediacy, that urgency. And so, yes, there is that reflex, that conditioned response to, I've got to get this out right away. The sooner I can get it done, the better off I'll be, and we start thinking of production metrics and, if we're not first, we're last and all that sort of stuff. And I think that there's a lot to be said about being deliberate when you make some of these choices. And so you talk about psychological safety and the agility model. And I think there is just that moment of we have a strategy to be deliberate in how we pivot, when we pivot, and somebody's always kind of listening for those moments to jump in and say, "Hey, this is who we are. Let's stay true to that," and hopefully latch on to more of the true signal and the true message as far as an organizational standpoint. Excuse me. And so I think that there's a lot of power in that being deliberate and being true to who you are as a person, as an organization. And making those choices to say, we will answer quickly, but we will not answer immediately. We will adapt swiftly, but not tomorrow, and things like that. So I think there's a flexibility in that, and it comes down to a certain mindset about being deliberate and knowing what you're trying to do as an organization or as a person and staying true to that, regardless of the winds that blow around you to try and knock you off course.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. I was reminded of that recording I mentioned earlier that I listened to, and it talks about that same sort of thing. You've got a vision or a purpose that you've got to deliberately really be working towards. But related to the psychological safety, then that also opens up the space for people to be challenging to that. Why are we moving so fast? This doesn't align with our values. Why are we responding this way? This doesn't meet the vision, right? And I think that's that deliberate, intentional thought process. It does sometimes require us to take a little bit of a slower step, not the fast one, right? And so, thank you for that. I appreciate it, Nick. Dr. Pam, let's go over to you.
Thanks, Emmy. So one thing that came to mind in the reactor pause reflect is in my experience with corporate, or even when I was in veterinary medicine, if you don't teach processes and make sure those processes are in place, and you don't train to build that muscle memory, to build that habit, to know how to react, like emergency services, or when I was a kid, it was duck and cover. California, earthquake. So we learned duck and cover. So anytime you feel shaken, poof, I'm under a desk or in a doorway. And so to that point of culture, and there's this expectation we're supposed to do this, that, and whatever, but we don't slow down. We don't take the time. the leaders don't stop and think, okay, my people are not able to react to even just a customer issue. Maybe there was, a shipment of widgets, widget parts that were just bad. And now everybody's scurrying and freaking out and hair on fire. Well, you're not taught, for the most part, how to handle those situations. And so that's where some of the more pause and reflect, let's slow down, let's find those gaps to understand how to work through these. And so it comes back to that critical thinking, that problem solving. Do we know how to think through these situations? Do we know how to use our brain? No. So I just wanted to add that part.
I love that. I just did a yearly training, safety training, and we were making a little cheeky comments about it. But at the end of the day, we had to do this interactive thing where we cleaned up the break room. We had to clean the spill, by the trash can, and we had to close the microwave door. And it really explained why these, sort of things that you may miss in the work environment when you're in a rush are unsafe. Somebody might slip. There might be some issue with the electricity if you leave this thing, with wires exposed. There may be an obstruction when you're walking, and then there's a workers' comp claim, right? So there's actually reasons and thoughts behind all of these very intentional things. And although we were kind of joking a little bit about it, the reality is it's a good training. And even the next day, I had some coffee on my counter, and I just wiped it up. Not that I wouldn't, but I thought about it, right? I had the moment to be trained about what the overall value of cleaning up spills was. And it was a very thoughtful wipe of the counter in that sense, because there was training.
And I'd like to add one more thing, Emmy, is to really demonstrate the training and building the muscle memory, CPR. That's probably one of the biggest things, and why they want you recertified within a certain amount of time is to make sure that you remember all the different steps, all the new stuff that come in. And a year ago, I actually had to put that into place. And so the mixture of my veterinary medical background as a licensed technician, plus all my CPR stuff over the last 20 years, it kicked in. And so I think that is a very big prime example that can be translated into corporate, whatever industry. It really doesn't matter, that you have to spend the time to make sure that everybody is able to know what is the process, how do we go things, where things are located. So thanks, Emmy.
Thank you. Yes, no, and I think that also just unknowingly promotes a safer environment, whether it's psychologically safe, physically safe, right? We're allowed to have a safer environment when people are knowing what to do and what's expected of them and why, which is a big part that I've noticed as some deficits on teams. They know kind of what to do, but not why. What's the purpose? So I appreciate that. LindaAnn, let's go back to you.
Managing expectations is a key to success no matter what you're doing. If there's other people involved, managing someone's expectations so that you both are in lockstep with the direction or how you're getting there is critically important to success. The one question I have for you, Emmy, and the team here is, I've been in a situation where, and this is going back to the psychological safety, and that is when you have someone who is of a closed mindset and who functions in fear. And when you initiate any change as you're going through an agile process, whether it's in any change at all, they tend to not embrace it and have a negative reaction. That negative reaction is contagious, and it can affect other people. Like when you were talking about the spirituality and things like that, has a lot of effect on some of the people around these one or two individuals. And so I was wondering, if I could tap into the collective on suggestions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll kind of share something here, and please, other hands that want to tackle this one. We've got a couple other hands up too, but one of the things that I've really tried to be intentional with when I notice, I've heard this called change antibodies before as well, or I've heard that be the term, but there's all kinds of other terms out there. I think I've even used K people constantly against virtually everything, and a lot of that is definitely based in the fear zone, but what I've personally tried to handle in that, and a very more of a one-on-one or a small group setting, is to understand where that comes from. So did they have an experience that made them resentful, or they lost their job somewhere because of something that went wrong and they were challenged? So what is the root of the fear and the fear response? Now there may be people out there who you'll never get that root out, right? But if you're able to at least identify what the root is, whether it's personal experience that they've had professionally, maybe even personally, so it may not be something they share all the way, but you can ask some targeted questions in more of a coaching format to be able to draw out and understand why do they do that. Because at the end of the day, although we all have difficulty with change in different, varying levels. My husband likes to laugh at me. He's like, for someone who teaches people to change, you really don't like to change things. And so, and he does that, and he's right. I don't love change all the time. I'm like, wait a minute, this is the plan that we project managed and, made this beautiful plan for. Why are we deviating? But at the end of the day, it's because of my background, and there's been some things that we've had to really work through in that change space at home, because I like order and structure in that environment, and it's difficult for me to come out of it. So really kind of identifying, I think, some of those underlying root causes of the fear-based response. You may not even have to ask questions. You may be able to just, with that framing of a thought, listen to the words that are being said. Are there common themes in the fear? And then maybe you can kind of dive into that a little bit. I do find it to be better in a small group or one-on-one setting to kind of talk through that. But you're right. I mean, the phrase that came to mind is one bad apple spoils a bunch, right? In fact, I'm going to propose to Jeremy, we do a month on old adages, or these little phrases that we can come up with and how they apply to the workplace. And so that really does happen in the environment, particularly if they are a social leader. People who are social leaders or can influence the group because they have a good relationship, that can be deeply impactful if there's a fear-based response and some interaction happening there that's negative towards the group. So I definitely recommend doing a little deeper dive, because once you kind of know the why, then you might be able to respond with a whiff of what's in it for them, and be a little bit more targeted about sharing what's going to be the beneficial thing for them, right? And maybe even having some change champions around them also tap into what's going to speak to them. It doesn't have to just be you. It could be people around them that are able to make some targeted comments back to that person. Paul, let's go over to you, and anyone else who wants to answer LindaAnn's question, feel free to throw your hand up as well.
If we think about the word agility itself, it's really about nimbleness, and nimbleness isn't necessarily speed, as others have said. It's really about being able to respond appropriately. So if you think about a nimble tennis player, it's not necessarily the player who's got the fastest, can get around the court the fastest. It's the person who can get to the right place at the right time. And so nimbleness isn't about being speeding all the time. So a nimble organization, or an agile organization, is one that can respond to challenges appropriately. And was it Nick who said, not necessarily right away, because sometimes it takes some time to think about what the best response is. And, the skill is in knowing when something needs to be dealt with immediately and when it can wait. And so there are some things that, sometimes something comes up, and if you wait a little while, you find that either your initial tendency, the initial thing you thought of, wasn't going to be the right response, or sometimes you don't have to respond at all because the problem just goes away on its own. But maybe a better way of thinking about agility is more in flexibility and flexibility and speed of response, as well as how you respond. And on the fear, I think Pamela hit it in the chat that a lot of it is the fear of losing control, because loss of control is stressful. It's sort of at the basis of a lot of stress. And so one of the tricks, if there has to be a change, is to get people to understand where they haven't lost control, where they can regain control.
I love that. And now that you mentioned that, Paul, thanks for your contribution there. LindaAnn, there is a mentor of mine I'm going to connect you with. Her name is Dr. Mary Jo Burchard, and she has a change model that is specifically around understanding some of the unspoken needs that are happening within a change that create those fear-based responses, because that can be silence too. And I think people sometimes take silence for compliance or agreement, but oftentimes it's actually not that. It's even a fear underlying the fear, and then they don't speak up. So I'll see if I can get you two connected. Her model, I think I mentioned it last week, is called Dual, DUEL, so you can kind of look at it a little bit. But we'll get you two connected.
That would be great, because even when it's been asked of this person, what's the issue, where does it come from, all that kind of stuff, they aren't willing to share. And that's not with me, it's with the person that he doesn't want to have change, so it's a fairly deep-seated thing, but it's really having an impact on the other people in the organization. And the other challenge is they're highly skilled, right? So they're important in that aspect of things. And so it's a little more complicated than in other situations where you can say, oh, well, it's time to move on from this person, where they're highly skilled and valued, right? So, yeah. And the other thing is I think that the possibility exists that they are setting things up so that they don't have to take the responsibility of leaving the organization if they don't like the change. They would rather have it a bad guy and having them be asked to leave. So it's interesting. I will take any help.
Absolutely, yes. I'll connect you with Dr. Burchard, the dual model, and I have a couple of books that she sent me that really relate to the emotional part of change and being kind of responsive to people's behaviors that happen through the emotional parts of our change and our responses and behaviors there. So, yeah, I think she'd be a great person for you to connect with. So definitely I'll get you connected. Nick, let's go over to you.
Yeah, I mean, that's the tough situation to be in with LindaAnn. And I think there are these narratives that people construct for themselves in times of change, in times of stress. And more often than not, when you're coming from your perspective, you're the hero of your own story. And if you're not, that's a whole separate sort of set of issues to deal with. I think, we talk about the idea of trying to keep things, psychologically safe and all that. I think part of that, we talk about being agile, being adaptive and all of that, but I think part of that too is an organization knowing what their lane and their role is. We have so many things that are one-stop shopping that, we've got department stores where you can get everything you need. You get your groceries and, bathing suit and sunscreen all in one spot. And it's great. It's modern convenience, and I do enjoy it. But at some point, like I look at me, I'm right now in hospitality. I can't, I can only do so much. I could give you a good meal and a good experience, and I can look to those broader things. But at the end of the day, the tools I have are burgers and fries. And so knowing what your lane is and not necessarily getting sidetracked. We always talk about shiny object syndrome in this room quite a bit. And I think that you get to buzzwords and you get to all these things, and they're great and they do demand a response. But the courage and the ability to stand where you are and be what you are, I think that provides a mission and a clarity within an organization that then allows people to be what they are within that. A server in my restaurant only has to be, pleasant in this building. I care about what goes on outside, but as far as being job related, all I can do is equip them to do that job there. And if they show up with their full personality, great. And if they decide not to, that's also their choice. I think we talk about, this want that everybody wants to be completely genuine and authentic, and there really are people there that are there to make a buck and go away. And so I think allowing that perspective in as well, not as fun and not as rich to discuss. It's a reality in the workplace, and I would hope that is something we can develop and just allow people to be safe where they are.
So, Nick, a question that kind of came to mind there. I am really always interested in industry-specific contexts and questions there. Tech is my space, so I know very little about lots of other spaces. In the service industry, or particularly in restaurants, are there any other considerations that really need to be made to promote psychological safety, knowing that there are such a wide variety of backgrounds and purposes and why they're in that industry? As you mentioned, some people are there just to make the buck and leave, right? Are there any other considerations that you've noticed in your leadership roles there that promote safety in such a diverse environment of people and workers?
I mean, there's a lot that you can't control. Like, you can't control if people are coming through the door and how they're going to think, feel, and act when they get there. I think that it's a balancing act to say, without these people coming in, we don't have a business model. So they're our, primary focus. But if we constantly let people come in, and I think part of what comes in the service industry culture is some level of trauma bonding. It's a lot of intense stress in short bursts. And no, is somebody shouting at you because they didn't get their Diet Coke the end of the world? No, but when you're also running around, with 6 other things that you're focusing on, it hurts, and you can shrug it off, but it's something that happens to all of us. And you hear servers share war stories. It's funny because there is some absurdity to it, but I know the ownership of the restaurant where I'm at, we have such low turnover because they do go out of their way to say, yes, we need to serve these people who are coming in. No, it's not okay for them to be verbally or abusive in any way to you. We're going to, let them have their tantrum. We're going to work through it after they're out of the building. They've reflected their, upset through review or bad tip or whatever. We're going to do our best to rally around you. Make sure it's not, make sure it was a one-off and not a pattern, and, adjust accordingly. Can we shrug it off as somebody was having a bad day? Yeah. Do we need to take a look and say, hey, do we need to train you on some conflict management skills or anything like that? So there's a lot that can be done. I think just, again, acknowledging what you are, who you are, what you do, and just saying that one's out of our control. They're having a bad day, and if they don't come back like they said they would, don't think we're any worse off for it.
I love that. And I'm also reminded of the 2005 movie Waiting, which gave a little bit of a funny, cheeky background to the waiting industry from the customers.
A little bit. There's more truth than I would like to admit, but there's a ton of embellishment. And at the time, the restaurant they filmed that in, I worked for the same franchise, and that was set up like the 2 locations that I worked at. So I relate to that movie more than I probably should.
Oh, how funny. How funny. Yeah, I liked it. I was working at a hotel at the time, and we thought we should make a hotel one because working at a front desk of a hotel is also very interesting, as you can imagine. Laura, let's go over to you.
Hey, thank you. So I appreciate the feedback and the conversation so far. One of the things I thought of in relation to LindaAnn's question is for work, we kind of reviewed and we considered and sort of built a training based off of Cotter's model of change. And he took some time to make a funny fable version. So I dropped the link in the chat for those on the call. But for those listening, it's called Our Iceberg is Melting. And it's about a group of penguins and their iceberg is melting. And what are they going to do? Because where are they going to live if their iceberg melts? And they have to deal with the change and the change of changing icebergs. And then what are you going to do to create long-lasting change? Because what if you move to another iceberg that's melting? How do you convince people that the iceberg is melting and the change is coming? And so it's written in a way that it knows it's ridiculous. So like it has a penguin with a briefcase, and it even makes fun of itself for having a penguin with a briefcase, because obviously they don't have a briefcase. And at one point, to prove the iceberg is melting, he uses like a bottle with water in it or something. And I don't remember the detail, but like obviously penguins aren't walking around with a Coke bottle. They can go reference. But they kind of frame a lot of the personalities and stereotypes that you experience during a change process in these penguin characters, right? And so one of the characters is named the professor because he's the one who gets very academic and analytical and asks all these questions, but is a little too removed to like the actual activity of change. And the reason I brought it up is because one of the penguins is nicknamed or is called No. And you can imagine his personality. It is no to everything. Anytime someone says anything, No is there and is like, no, we're not doing it. And so for me, one of the things I appreciated in the fable was, how do you manage a no during a time of change? So you see how the penguins will shift no to interacting with the professor, because as no is saying, well, what about this? What about that? This could go wrong. We shouldn't do this because of da-da-da. And then the professor is like, oh, that's a really interesting, I wonder what would happen, and is engaging with them. So then no feels heard, and there is actually some good conversation being done. But it also gets no and the professor to like work together and be distracted, while some of the more hands-on practical penguins are figuring out the reality and not the hypothetical of the change, right? And there's some other really good examples of how they engage no. And I appreciate it because it's not writing off no as irrelevant to the conversation. He is still an important element. It is nice to have those people who will stop and say, no, I don't want to do this, because they might have some very valid concerns that you need to, again, not rush a change. You want to stop and take that into consideration and think on it and whatnot. So that's why I dropped it in the chat, and I hope y'all engage with it. It's a very fast read, like maybe 100 pages or something. So I just thought that was a fun way to think through dealing with a change and dealing with the different personalities. So I wanted to share that. That was my 2 cents.
Thank you, Laura. I love that. And I think it's also like a gentle entry into that sort of a conversation too, because it is with silly characters and, written in a way that is a little less threatening even, right? Like it's, so I love that. And I've been working in many places with with human no-nos. And so it's a very interesting way. So I'm definitely going to check it out. Thank you for sharing that. And what that also reminded me of as well was something that somebody else said about control. I think it might have been in the comments or even vocally here. I forget, and I apologize if it was your comment, but about what can you control? And recently I've been seeing a lot of different things in different visual formats, but often it's concentric rings that really talk about your direct influence of control being in your kind of center ring. That's really the things that are related to you more often than not, but perhaps you're a leader and you do have direct control over other things like budgets and some other factors, right? But your direct area of control in a concentric ring model or format is going to be that center one. The next exterior ring is going to be things that you have influence over, but not direct control. And the third concentric ring, and there may even be some other fourth depending on how the models are drawn, is little control or no control on the exterior models. And it doesn't mean that you need to ignore the things that are being said about the areas you have no control in. You may need to reassure people. You may need to just maintain a level of awareness of the things that you don't have control over. It doesn't mean ignore, right? But also identifying with folks on a team has been something that's the model that's been very helpful, at least for me, is to look at, okay, what is within our direct sphere of control? What can we influence? And there may be people on the team who have more influence or pull than others. And so who has influence? How much can we influence? And how can we get connected with people who can influence in that second sphere? But really, then the things that are outside of the control, those are really things that require awareness and consideration. But I think talking about even just kind of deflating that and being like, we don't have control over X, right? When COVID happened, we didn't have control over everybody getting sent home to the office. So even the people who hate working from home, so sorry, this is out of our control, right? And how do we meet and acknowledge the emotions that might come with that, the frustrations that might come with that, the fear that might come with that? It is giving acknowledgement even to that first step, which is we do not have control over this, but now we have to still respond to it. And how do we do that? So I really do like to make very targeted comments about what can we control, what can we not, and how do we respond to the things that we can't control. So thank you for that. I'm really excited to check out this book with No in it, or this quick read. I do want to kind of touch on, again, from the agility perspective, because I think that's obviously the topic of the month here, and the psychological safety, kind of the overlap there a little bit, and talk about the relationships piece. So that was one of the first things I mentioned in the literature that I shared there, is the relationships. So there are teamwork is kind of the word that comes to mind there in that, but you're not always working in a collaborative team or a self-managing team or a cross-functional team as agile quote unquote practices will reflect. But I think there's a lot of value in discussing the value of relationships when it comes to agility. And I was reminded of a professor that I talked to. She was a former professor of kinesiology leadership at Kent State. And she talked to me about building this department. They didn't have any kinesiology leadership specifically. And so she built this program and was the director of this program. And when I did an interview with her, I asked her what was the most critical part of building this program for you from a leadership perspective. And she said, oh, absolutely, the relationship building. So she had partnerships going with different organizations outside of the university. She was building relationships with students who cared about the leadership element of there. And she spoke to the fact that because she was kind of starting this change in the university from scratch, it was the relationships with people that had the things she needed, I guess, if you would say that, or had the information she needed, or the knowledge, or the funding, whatever it is, right, that she needed, that she had to build first the relationship with, so that as she had to change, pivot, redesign, and iterate, she had people to tap into that she had already established a working friendship or relationship with. And so they were more apt to respond to her positively when she reached out to them. She wasn't cold calling people and saying, I need X, Y, and Z from you. Maybe it's someone with deep institutional knowledge and you're wanting to make sure that you build a good relationship with them so that you can pave and tap into that institutional knowledge when you need it, depending on the context there. And so that particular thing really, really stuck out to me, that was the first thing she mentioned when she was creating something new and changing it on the fly, was that she had to build relationships with people, upward, downward, sideways, through the community. The relationship building for her was the most critical element there, so that she could make sure she had all the building blocks and put all the pieces in place to get this program started. And it has lived on beyond her. And so it's really cool to see some of the things that she built the foundation for as well. I do want to also just touch on the fast word. We kind of talked, I think it was Paul that mentioned it again, the fast piece of it again. And I think that is where I want to make sure that I'm kind of tapping into kind of in the end of this month on agility, because I think it's a big misnomer, is that agile means fast, right? And I love that he talked about it from even a kind of a sports context. And but I think the other thing there is that it takes practice then, right? So if you're going to be nimble, which I think is the word he used, it requires some practice in the sporting context, and it's going to take the same in the organization. So whether that is intentional practice through training, or maybe some other activities and working with your team. I mentioned the relationship. There's relationship building that's important really cool thing I saw recently was a team that was really struggling with some changes happening in their organization. Their engagement scoring area for teamwork was in the 90s still. So the relationship piece of it and the teamwork piece of it, even though the organization and the change and all of that felt really yucky, the fact that they had teamwork and that they were collaborating together and could pause and practice relationship building and do those things throughout the team was the critical factor for that team in helping them to respond better to that change because they could lean on each other. I think Nick called it trauma bonding. So I wonder if it's a little bit of that happening there in that particular team as well. But at the end of the day, their team ratings for teamwork were, I mean, off the charts from any other team that was in that particular division or that department, even though they had some pretty stinky scores for the actual change in inclusion in company area and that kind of stuff. So I think it really speaks to the value of relationship building within teams. It speaks to the value of relationship building with your, as a leader, right? Helping foster that, not necessarily being a part of it, but fostering it for your teams because I mean, overall, you couldn't believe how high the teamwork score was when all the other areas were like not super wonderful. And so I loved seeing that actually, because I think they have really been intentional about taking time to team build, to relationship build, and to really care about and uplift each other. And they're a remote team, fully remote global team. And so I think that's another cool thing is across boundaries, they've been able to really build relationships, sustain those relationships, and care about the person on the other side of the screen. And it's helped them be responsive to change in a really beautiful way, even though they don't always feel great about it, which the scores for that particular team also tell you. All right. So I'm just checking the comments here. All right. So I know we've got no official host to close us out here today, but I know we're heading into the month of July here. I have actually not taken a look to see if the next month's topics are on the website, but cboc.com/podcast.
They are not.
Yes,
because
okay, they're not up there yet.
Because last week Jeremy asked me about taking July, and so what I am going to focus on is really how do you maintain a culture through scaling, right? Because everybody really values their culture and wants to protect that and maintain it often, but through the growth process and through the change process, you have to figure out what pieces are important to the foundation of that culture and what elements do you really want to keep, and then how do we protect those pieces while you're changing all around it, because some parts of culture are going to change just through the scaling and change process, right? But you have to figure out what pieces you really want to maintain and protect in order to have the culture you've worked so hard to build survive the growth and change.
I love that. And I'm very excited about that topic. And I'll share with you in a message somewhere that reminded me about an organizational assessment and analysis tool called STRAT. It's Strategic Team Review and Action Tool, and I've used it for organizational culture. So I'll get to bring that topic up next month. Super excited to,
that's
exciting.
To hear you. Okay.
Yay. So no, I love it. We did it actually as an assessment for a team that was going through exactly that. So I love it. Thank you so much for giving us a little bit of a runway for next month, LindaAnn. Super excited to see your topics. And I think that's really timely and relevant for organizations all over. So very, very excited to hear the month's topics. And yay, LindaAnn, for leading us in the next month. So thanks all. I am really, really excited to kind of conclude this conversation on agility. I'm very passionate about the topic. I think it'll come up in different contexts and conversation, but super excited that we got to have a whole month talking about all things agile, from leaders to orgs to us as individuals, and keeping safe in the workplace. So very excited for next month's transition to LindaAnn and some cool topics about scaling and culture. And we will definitely see you guys back in 1 week's time. I'll count us out, and we'll meet in 1 week. 3, 2, and 1.